you. Thanks, Elizabeth and Kevin and everyone here at Trans States. It's a pleasure to be here. So I worked on a project about the religion of spiritualism for 20 years now. It was published as a book titled Séance in 2019 by Fulgur. And it's now been re-released in a second edition, which is on display here in the gallery. And so that's the new edition's upstairs on a stand. So this project took 20 years to finish, mainly because spiritualism is a challenging topic. And part of what makes it so controversial is the religion's relationship with the art of deception. And I wanted to make the point that it's an interesting time to be speaking about spiritualism. Séance pictures were recently a centerpiece at the Venice Biennale. Spiritualism was recently explored in a major exhibition at the Minneapolis Museum of Art. And spiritualist artist Hilma af Klint's 2019 retrospective at the Guggenheim Museum in New York was the most popular exhibition and best-selling catalog in the museum's history. When I began my project, this was not the case. I found that there was very little knowledge. People I knew or at schools and colleges about the history of spiritualism. So I started photographing in the world's largest spiritualist community, Lilydale, New York, in 2001, while I was working as a photojournalist. And I planned to spend one summer making a short documentary project about this quirky little town where everyone filled with mediums who told me they could talk with the dead. But in Lilydale that summer, I learned about spiritualism's past, which was a story I had never heard before. Spiritualism is an American-born religion that began in upstate New York in 1848 when two adolescent sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox, claimed contact with the spirit of a murdered man buried beneath their home. Their method of communicating using letter-coded rapping developed into a hugely popular movement that spread across the Western world. This is the picture of the Italian medium Eusebia Palladino, who was studied by the most respected scientists of her day, including several Nobel laureates. Eusebia was notoriously deceptive. She would famously say to her investigators, "Hold me tight or I'll cheat." Stories like Eusebia's have often been censored. There has been a queasiness surrounding spiritualism in the academia and in the media. But however uncomfortable, it is undeniable that spiritualism stands at the crossroads of Western culture. Its influence echoes in and brings together histories of science, medicine, technology, and art. There's a direct path leading straight from the seance room to the birthplaces of feminism and women's rights, forensic science, wireless communication, evolutionary theory, experimental psychology, and even the very birth of modern art. Wherever you find 19th century innovation, you find spiritualism. This history was missing from every textbook I had ever studied from. Learning about spiritualism's cultural legacy was my first big shock, discovering facts like the American President Abraham Lincoln and his wife hosted seances in the White House. But the bigger surprise was finding that spiritualism and photography had been connected since their beginnings. This link between spiritualism and photography became a primary focus of my art and my research. Spiritualism's photographic past is one of the most bizarre, absurd, and uniquely unsettling chapters within the history of photography. It was mind-blowing to realize that spiritualism was the first religion to create an iconography using the new medium of photography. You could say that Catholicism is to painting as spiritualism is to photography. And my work became an attempt to build onto this strange visual record. I knew almost nothing about spiritualism when I began photographing in Lilydale in 2001. And I wanted to learn everything I could about spiritualism and mediumship and clairvoyance. And I wandered around Lilydale asking the residents I met to teach me about spiritualism, and they very graciously did. And these are some of the early Lilydale pictures. This one that shows some of their famous spirit art, the swan on the lake, spiritual healing, spoon bending. But I was constantly questioning how to photograph spiritualism. How do you photograph the exchange between a veiled presence and a visible body? Eventually, I was allowed to bring my camera into seances, but I struggled with how to be true to the psychological reality of these events. I constantly asked myself, how do you photograph the invisible? And soon I started to have a few happy accidents with my camera, And this is one early on. We were in a seance situation, and they were passing around a red light and trying to invoke a phenomenon they call it transfiguration, where you see the face change. And we were sitting in this dark room, and everyone was seeing a second face next to by this woman. And, oh, it's not your face, but it looks like you, but it's not you. Maybe it's your grandmother, maybe it's your doppelganger, maybe it's that voodoo priestess Marie Laveau. And I did not see a second face. I saw a woman holding a flashlight, and I took what I thought was a sharp picture, and this is what I got on my negative. And this accidental photograph was more psychologically true to the event than any straight photograph I could have made. I found this accident thrilling. It was synchronistic. It was uncanny. This is another early accidental picture. I was taking portraits of this woman, and in two images, there's this purple orb right on the same part of her body, but in different parts of frames, two different rolls of film, and I never gotten anything like that before. And I printed the pictures, and I brought them to her. I said, I got these weird pictures of you last time I was here, and she took the pictures and held them in her hand for a long time, and she goes, oh, that's Bob. And she meant her dead husband, that he had appeared as this orb, and that was the first time I ever considered assigning meaning to a photographic anomaly. But it was also in this museum where I first learned about spirit photography. I had never heard the term spirit photography before. I was shocked by this history. These images were so absurd and so prankish and so phony. I was also struck by their tenderness and how spirit photographs used photographic reality to communicate grief and love and loss. But it was the pictures of spiritualist mediums in action that became of the most interest to me. And discovering ectoplasm really blew my mind. I found ectoplasm particularly shocking. These images were highly strange and grotesque and oddly beautiful. They were the most uniquely unsettling photographs I had ever encountered. And I desperately wanted to decode this imagery, and I wanted to understand the meaning behind them, and I wanted to know what ectoplasm even was. And so I think many of us, myself included, may have first heard the term ectoplasm via the movie Ghostbusters. And Dan Aykroyd, the creator of Ghostbusters, is actually a fourth-generation spiritualist, and he's drawing that term straight from spiritualist practice. The movie's based on his great-grandfather's Séance, or it was inspired by his Séance diary that Dan found. Ectoplasm has made other appearances in visual culture. Here's one by the artist Mike Kelly that predates Ghostbusters. Here's a more recent example of ectoplasm in the art world from Tony Orsler's 2015 film Imponderable. And there's also examples like this. It's a spooky ghost scene from South Park. And I'm just trying to make the point that there is a cultural awareness of ectoplasm that is completely separated from spiritualism in its history. Within these examples, the visionary artist Pa La-Folie, with his statement, "Ectoplasm unites life with death," comes closest to explaining ectoplasm's authentic meaning. The word ectoplasm is taken from the Greek ektos plus plasma, meaning outside formed. It's a paradoxical substance that is supposed to be spiritual and material. It is believed to merge the realms of life and death. It was named by Charles Richet, a Nobel Prize winner in medicine. And in Richet's description, it's an extension of the medium's body that creates a form for itself and seems to come to life. In the Victorian era and into the early 20th century, serious attempts were made to study ectoplasm. Some compared it to natural phenomena like plasma, spiderwebs, slime molds, the chrysalis of caterpillars, or the pseudopods of protozoa. But there's the problem of cross-cultural evidence. Why doesn't ectoplasm appear in other cultures or throughout the ages? It seems to move across the world only after the photographic evidence has been shared. Some argue that psychokinetic abilities can be accessed through visual focus, such as how paintings and sculptures of levitations and stigmata served as inspiration for the bodily feats of saints such as St. Joseph of Cupertino and St. Catherine of Siena. Others have pointed to the shamanic concept of spiritualized phlegm as a cross-cultural example. But scandal has always surrounded ectoplasm. Houdini famously hated it. And scam seances have been confessed and exposed. Eventually, including in this book, which is a great read, by the way, eventually spiritualist churches distanced themselves from ectoplasm. Many even banned darkroom seances to avoid any association with fraud. Instead, spiritualism began focusing almost exclusively on clairvoyant mediumship, such as you see in the television shows. Like, here's one we have in the United States, the Long Island Medium. It's a very different aesthetic, bright rooms, candles, nothing spooky. But many of the mediums I met told me that they believed in the reality of ectoplasm. I couldn't help but wonder if there were other mediums out in the world still trying to produce ectoplasm. And this led me to the Arthur Findlay College, a learning center for spiritualists outside of London. And the best way to describe Arthur Findlay College is as a Hogwarts for adult spiritualists. And I traveled there in 2003 to attend a course as a student, and I finally saw a real medium's cabinet, and we were instructed how to use it. This was my seance classroom. All week, we sat in the dark and sang, calling the spirits in, asking them to appear. We were told ectoplasm is very dangerous to produce, and that only the very best mediums can produce it, and each of us had to take a turn in the cabinet and see what would happen. But there definitely was no ectoplasm appearing, and by midweek, our teacher, this very respected tutor at the college, told us we were all pretty terrible physical mediums, and he was a good one, but we were so bad that his vibe was off. He could not manifest his psychic abilities. And so everyone got really down, and during a tea break, one student suddenly collapsed into a chair, and she cried out, "Oh, look, I've got some," and she had tissue all over her face and her mouth and ears, and this joke and this wax artifact were as close as I got to ectoplasm that week. And so a little bit after this time, I became really frustrated with the topic of spiritualism, and I became doubtful that I would ever encounter ectoplasm. And I actually stopped working on the project for 4 years because I could see no way to complete it. But I couldn't stop thinking about spiritualism. So I started reading about spiritualist history and psychical research and parapsychology and shamanism, anthropology of ritual, all that stuff. And these are 3 of the books that made me rethink the line between the true and the false, and I began to embrace all of this ambiguity that I had been encountering. And during this period, I also learned about a concept called instrumental transcommunication, which is when you use technology in combination of mediumship. And this ITC movement became popular in spiritualism through the Skull experiment, which happened here in England in the 90s. It was pretty, it was in the press quite a bit, late 90s. And the Skull seances created a large amount of audio, video, and photography. And I became inspired by this visionary use of technology and the holiness of their photographic phenomena. And I wanted to learn what was happening concerning photography and technology and spiritualism. So I began seeking out ITC practitioners and documenting combinations of mediumship and technology. And I was inspired by these practitioners with their do-it-yourself aesthetics and the technical rule breaking, and just how playful and creative all of the exercises were, and how they used their devices as an extension of their senses. And this is the medium Sylvia Howarth, and she features prominently in my book, and she's one of the mediums that I started working with who was really strongly mixing clairvoyance and technology. And Sylvia takes videos of herself, and she captures a video at points of corruption using these digital glitches to illustrate her spiritual experience. She's compiled thousands and thousands of these pictures like this into digital notebooks, pictures like this. And so many of her works started to inspire my attempts to photograph her, trying to use the camera to show Sylvia morphing or deconstructing, or to illustrate the spiritualist concept of blending or merging with spirits, or this concept of masking, where the spirit appears over the medium's face. This is a view of Sylvia's living room, which doubles as a seance space, and this shows some of the celebrities her and her husband, Chris, seek contact with. Communication with the deceased famous is a practice common since spiritualism's beginning, and it's kind of a topic I'm very interested in, and I explore a lot further in the book. And these are spirit trumpets with celebrity spirit guides, handmade by Sylvia. And this is Sylvia's husband, Chris, sitting with those. And his main guide is the musician Louis Armstrong. And I don't know why certain celebrities become popular, but Louis Armstrong seems to be one of the most popular seance celebrities. So here's Chris singing in trance as Louis. So I want to get back to this idea of ectoplasm. And eventually I traveled all over to document mediums who said they were working with ectoplasm. But I discovered that most mediums had their own interpretation of this term. When they told me they were working with ectoplasm, most were not talking about those white gauzy streams that you see in the vintage pictures. The word ectoplasm was used to refer to temperature changes, feelings, smells, or hypnotic perceptions. This ectoplasmic power could be responsible for any of the effects they were trying to create, including healing. Ectoplasm could be material, but could also be invisible energy. It could be a force that acted upon the body. So I began to, does this one come through and you can see it? Sometimes it's blown out. So I began to play with this photographic synchronicity and considering how the photographic process could render metaphors for the invisible situations. And this is one example where I was taking a picture of this medium, Sharon, and she said, don't do any of those long exposures, just do the fast exposures. People always accuse me of faking if you use a long exposure. So I said, okay, I pushed the camera as far as it could go, shortest shutter speed possible, and at one point her spirit guide addressed me and started to direct me and said, you're going to take one picture and I'm going to show you one long exposure and I'm going to show you my mask. And this is the picture that I took. And I started to really play with the process, and I became excited by crossing this boundary of what is considered bad or wrong or unprofessional in photography. And I invited photographic anomaly. I sought photographs that contain both mechanical and spiritual explanations requiring an interpretation. And this approach considers the conjuring power of photography itself. It embraces the mystery of who or what is the medium. But as far as literal ectoplasm, like the white gauzy streams seen in the vintage images, I did find one medium. The most famous and controversial medium in the world right now is Kai Mügge from Germany. In 2013, I had my first opportunity to photograph Kai, who was different from most of the physical mediums I met. When Kai said that he produced ectoplasm, he meant exactly like the white gauzy stream seen in the vintage images. It was truly a surreal experience, like watching the vintage photographs jump to life right in front of my eyes. According to Kai, ectoplasm can be seen as a device, a screen for projection, a place to put the unarticulated. Kai says ectoplasm can act as a physical place for the ineffable. He also describes ectoplasm as a flesh that is literally born, a living, breathing substance. I asked Kai, why? What's the purpose of these seances? Why do you go traveling around the world producing ectoplasm? He says there are two reasons. One, ectoplasm has healing powers. This healing is a byproduct that comes about through the attempt to merge the material and spiritual realms. And number two, it's to get people out of their own heads. This is a quote. We are not trying to make anyone believe anything. We are just happy if at least they have one thought outside of their normal thought pattern during our seance. Soon after I made my first photographs of Kai, he was accused of fraud by several of the parapsychologists who were studying him. And there was this big scandal that revolved around somebody getting into his eBay account and discovering he bought spiderweb material on the web, and whether it was used for a video to show the difference between real and fake ectoplasm. It was like a whole saga. There were papers written about it. I could do a whole presentation on it. And so after this happened, I thought, what is Kai going to do now? Like, what will happen after this? And Kai continued on, unbothered by his critics, and he did something shocking. He brought back full-formed materializations. And this is something that has not happened in spiritualism in many, many years. I mean, here and there you can find it, but really since the late 1800s, this was not, happening. And here is Kai manifesting the most famous spirit in the history of Séance, the pirate John King, who's also a spirit guide to many, many, many mediums. When I saw these images, I decided I had to go and see these materializations for myself. And so I called Kai and I said, can I come and photograph these new materializations? And he said, I only do them in Germany and Switzerland. And yes, you are welcome to come, but I cannot guarantee that anything's going to happen, and you might not get a picture, and I don't even know if we'll do a materialization. And I said, okay, I'm going to take the chance. And so I booked a flight, and I went to Switzerland, and there was a materialization, and I did get a picture. And I made this picture. And Kai said, okay, send me the pictures as soon as you get to your hotel. So I got to the hotel, sent them pictures, and I immediately get a reply back, oh, Shannon, this picture is awful. Oh, you can never show this picture to anybody, it's awful. He titled it literally a mediumistic preterm birth that he was so stressed out by my presence, because I had come for so long, that the spirit came out malformed. And so I was not allowed to use this picture. But what happened was a few weeks later, Colonel Alcott, the materialized spirit, appeared again, and Kai's personal photographer, Marcus Kepler, got the shot of a fully formed Alcott. So once this picture was out on Facebook, published on the blog, then I was allowed to use my bad picture. I'm going to end with just a few quotes from Kai. This is Kai on the topic of deception and mediumship. Kai openly questions what science has done for spiritualism and implies that the spiritualist mindset is arrogant. He says, with spiritualism in 1848, Western culture was mirroring older traditions and practices. The only new thing is the idea that spirits had to prove themselves. Like mediums of the past, Kai has been the subject of studies that include fraud precautions such as body cavity searches. And he no longer is interested in doing things like that. He now seeks those who experimentally accept, so he can explore what he calls the seance energy dynamic. He says we need the sitters, not the scientists. Mixed mediumship is the term used to describe fraud perpetrated by mediums with genuine gifts. It's begrudgingly accepted in spiritualism that even great mediums will cheat when the power is low or when a situation is not going their way. And Kai unabashedly acknowledges that mediums help themselves out when the unforeseen happens, like suddenly losing the connection. He says in both mental and physical mediumship, this happens. It's damage control, nothing else, and common human behavior. He says the moral standards imposed on mediums have become more so than other members of society, especially scientists. They bend their data regularly for publications. I'm going to end now. I went a little long, so this is the last thing I'll say. Kai and I have discussed the strangeness of spiritualist imagery. He says the phony, grotesque quality is organic and necessary. This bizarreness opens up something in the spectator that would not become open without the spectacle. Kai talks about the holistic quality of the seance room and the importance of pushing the limits of the rational mind. It's the distortion of the perception of the physical world that opens our access to another one. Our perception builds our reality, and perception needs to be destabilized so that things can happen. Darkness is a tool for these processes and for the experimental states that expand minds. The history of the supernatural is the materialization of the unknown. Something archetypal is taking place when the three-dimensional reality of the seance room is taken over. Okay, I'll stop there.
Any questions?
Is there within the tradition of physical mediumship, is there an explanation for why physical materialization disappeared for so long, and then does Kai have a sort of narrative for why it returned through here?
Well, they technically did not disappear. They went underground. So you'll hear stories of like home circles that were doing things, but it wasn't documented and it wasn't accepted and it wasn't presented in the churches or in the centers. So, and I did find, like in my book upstairs, it's my first half is historical and essays, middle is my pictures, and then the end is my notes with reference pictures. And I did find a picture from the 50s, a full materialization in full light, but it became very uncommon and rare.
Can you explain the process of the full materialization? You
Like
were
what I
there
saw?
To witness, yeah. What did you see?
Well, it was very dark, and then Kai's wife Julia uses the lights, and so it's very, very dark, and then the light gets raised, and then the materialization is suddenly there, and then the lights went. I don't remember exactly how it went, but the light goes in and out, and then that spirit, the full materialization, did not speak. It just kind of appeared, and then it was gone.
So did Kai metamorphosize, or is this full spiritual, this being coming out of nowhere?
You can't really tell because of the lighting scenario, so I can't, the lights go slowly up, and then the spirit is there, and then the lights are gone, and it's gone. So.
Is there retching involved?
He, every one of his seances has been different. He does this holotropic breathing technique in the beginning, and there's a lot of that usually in the beginning of his seances, and they go on for 3 hours, very long processes. He gives you he gives you a talk, and then you wait a while, and then there's the induction, and you're there in the room for the induction, and but every situation with him has been totally different. And actually, right before this conference, he sent me an email saying, "Very offended you're going to talk under the topic of deception," and and this is putting the wrong idea about me in the air. And I said, "No, actually, Kai, I think you would really like this conference." That's what I told him. And yeah, so what else? I don't know if that is.
Yeah, can I just ask, I was interesting because there's photography is a lot of time is documentation. How much does for yourself, is your photography, is it documentation, or are they manifestations themselves? What do you, because especially when you started to bend them as well, I think it's that really interesting crossover point.
Yeah.
Between, and your own experiences and then the photograph itself.
Well, so the book contains all straightforward documentation of historical stuff, and then kind of documentary images, and then me trying to play and bend, and it's supposed to be up to the viewer what's happening. You can read the mechanical explanation, you can read the spiritual explanation, and kind of running the processes of spiritualism and photography against each other. Okay. Kind of confusing the process.
After 20 years of studying this, are you a skeptic or are you a believer?
Oh, that's a good question. What I usually say is, it depends the day that you catch me, because I really have seen things that span the gamut. I've had truly, really extreme, mysterious experiences, and I've seen the most ridiculous situations that has this brand of humor embedded in it that you cannot get anywhere else. I've never laughed so hard being in certain paranormal situations.
Were you anytime kind of scared or unsettled, or
And spiritualism is actually the practice is actually pretty open and general and very grandmotherly vibe. The one thing I said in the book, that the thing that does scare me is this paradrama that happens where people get kind of the things that happen after, with the turf wars and the drama, or the when the emotions get really fueled and people are focusing on you because that kind of stuff freaks me out way more than anything.
Not in the moment.
No, not really. Other people have stories, but I've usually been also pretty careful, like, but I have seen some wacky stuff. I mean,
Well, you know, we both witnessed the You Stole My Spirit Guide incident. It's just been one hell of an amazing rock and roll paranormal journey.
Donna's in the book. She's an EVP
And
researcher. I
you
tell
see
her
things
story.
that just blow your mind that you lay in bed for like 7 days thinking about. And I would say to anybody who is here in this room, go and visit the Art of Trinity College if you ever get the opportunity, because it's a real eye-opener. And it's played an instrumental part in what Shannon's done.
So,
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I know your book is hot off the press, literally. Is it available to purchase and
oh,
where?
yes, okay. So I don't have copies of the book, but my publisher gave me a discount code. So if anybody wants to email me at this email, I'll send you the link and you can order it. It's discounted for anybody who wants to purchase it, who's here. And so, thank you.